So for art's benefit, what book have we been in the past couple of weeks?
Ruth.
Ruth, yes. We've been in the book of Ruth. What country did Ruth come from? Didn't know there was going to be a pop quiz, did you? So Ruth was from the country of Moab. Moab. So this week we're going to be going into Ruth chapter 3. So when we left the story, Ruth has come from Moab to Bethlehem with her mother-in-law, Naomi. It's a long journey, 50 to 70 miles, long journey across the land. They got back to Bethlehem, where Naomi was from, and her husband, and her 2 sons who had died in Moab. Ruth came back with her. Ruth had made the statement that, entreat me not to leave you, or turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. And your people shall be my people, and your God my God. And where you die, I will die, and there I'll be buried. And the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. So Ruth had made a commitment to go back with Naomi. And last week in chapter 2, once again, they're widows. They don't have any source of income, but it's the barley harvest season. And so Ruth knows about the provision that's in the Pentateuch, in the Torah, that widows, strangers, aliens, the poor can go out to the fields and collect some grain and have that to eat. And she happens to be in the field of Boaz, or like God allowed her to go into that field. God is setting up some things, and Ruth finds favor in Boaz's sight, and Boaz helps her out by allowing some of the grain to fall onto the ground and to help her even more. So she gets a huge chunk of grain that will last her and Naomi for about a week. And so as we're at this particular section, and Boaz, Naomi tells her, is a close relative or a kinsman redeemer. And so where we pick up today is going to be in Ruth chapter 3. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you? Now Boaz, whose young women you are with, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight on the threshing floor. Therefore, wash yourself and anoint yourself and put on your best garment and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. And then it shall be, when he lies down, that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what you shall do. And she said to her, All that you say, to me, I will do. So there's been a relationship that's been building up here. So starting back in Ruth chapter 1, we have it saying, So Naomi returned with Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. In chapter 2, we have it where it says, Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, Blessed be the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead. Now here we have, in chapter 3, it's going from the narrator telling the story to going to Naomi speaking directly to Ruth. But we have a different term here. Instead of calling her daughter-in-law, it says, My daughter. There's been a relationship change. That it's more than just, this is Mahlon's widow, Ruth. Ruth is basically like Naomi's daughter now. So much so, and she says, I'm going to take care of you. You've been taking care of me. You've been helping with the food, and you don't really know what the age is of Naomi at this time. But she says, Ruth, I want to provide for your security, for your future. So here we have Naomi giving this particular plan, saying, shall I not seek security for you? And so this particular phrase is talking about the future, that she really wants to get her a husband. But it's also because we don't know how old Naomi is. We don't know how long she's going to be alive. And so it's one thing if Ruth is in the country of Israel, in Bethlehem, and she's living with a person from Bethlehem, but what happens if Naomi dies? Ruth is sort of up the creek without a paddle. She'd probably have to go back to Moab. We don't really know what would happen to her. So Naomi's saying, I'm going to provide security, protection for you. Naomi couldn't give her a husband. Back in chapter 1, she said, turn back, my daughters, when she's talking to Oprah, and Ruth says, for I'm too old to have a husband. If I should say I have this hope, if I have a husband tonight, should I also bear sons? Would you wait for them to show up? So Naomi is running out of time, and she wants to provide security for Ruth for all that she's done. So she says, it'll be well with you. And she says, now Boaz, you've been going to Boaz's fields, you've been getting the grain, you've been taking care of that. Boaz, whose young women you are with, is he not our relative? Is he not our kinsman? Is he not our kinsman redeemer? Back in the book of Leviticus is where this particular phrase comes from, or this particular concept. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 25. And I'll read it here. This is talking about the redemption of property. I'll start back in verse 23. This is Leviticus 25, beginning in verse 23. And the land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. This is God speaking. For you are strangers and sojourners with me, and in all the land, your possession, you shall grant redemption of the land. Here's in verse 25. And if one of your brethren becomes poor, and has sold some of his possession, and if his remaining relative comes to redeem it, then he may redeem it, what his brother sold. So, Naomi knows this particular thing, and Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. He has the ability to redeem the land that Elimelech had sold before they had gone to Moab. And in doing so, could also redeem Ruth. So Naomi says, is he not our relative? Is he not our kinsman? And in fact, he is winnowing barley tonight in the threshing floor. So Naomi has some inside scoop on what's happening. She knows what's happening. And, I know exactly where Boaz is going to be tonight, and this is what you're going to do. So he's winnowing barley. And it was very interesting finding out about this whole process. I grew up in an area where there's a lot of agriculture, but in the Middle East, for this winnowing is taken care of, this wasn't something that would take place in a building with walls or roof or anything. It would basically be an open-air circular spot that would be about 50 to 100 feet in diameter. And so what the process would go through with this winnowing and this thrashing is they would beat the grain, and they might actually, one of the commentators that I was looking at, they would harvest the grain, they would bundle it in the field, and then they would carry it either by hand or by a cart to this particular area, this threshing floor. And then they would use either wagons with animals, and they would run over top of it, and then they would break it apart. And this would remove the husks and the grain from the husk. And then you'd have the winnowing. And part of the reason that this was like this open area, and probably the reason it was done at night, is because they would use the wind that was coming through. It wouldn't want a really heavy wind, but you wouldn't want a real light wind either. It was this medium kind of wind, and it would blow the dust and the smaller particles, the chaff, away from it. And so this is where Boaz was going to be at, doing this particular winnowing and thrashing. And in the Middle East, this was also a time of celebration. So they're actually able to do, this big celebration. The harvest has been good. Remember, going back, whatever the time period was, the 10 years, there had been a famine. And so it's still been good. There was bread in the house of bread in Bethlehem, and now they were able to have some food. And so they would have a time of celebration. So as Naomi is giving this plan to her, she says, all right, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go wash yourself, bathe yourself. You're going to anoint yourself, put perfume on, essential oils, whatever you have. You're going to make You're going to make yourself smell really pretty. Put on your best clothes, and then you're going to go to the threshing floor. But don't make yourself known. That's the key thing here. So you're going to wash yourself. You're going to anoint yourself. You're going to dress up nice, but you sort of want to stay in the shadows until he's finished eating. He has a merry heart, and he's going to fall asleep. So go down to the threshing floor. Don't make yourself known. And so pay attention where he's going to be sleeping. So pay attention as it's getting darker out. You don't want to go to the wrong person because there's probably other men in there at that point in time. And so go down to the threshing floor and notice where he lays and uncover his feet and lie down at his feet. And in this particular context, there is a sexual overtone into this particular thing as well. But she's uncovering his feet. She says, uncover his feet, lay down, and wait until he gives you instructions. And then he'll let you know what to do at that point in time. So Ruth doesn't argue. She doesn't make a fuss or anything. She says, everything that you said, I will do. So then we have, going in from verse 6, so she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law instructed her. And after Boaz had eaten and drunk, not necessarily, from alcohol, but just, he's happy, he's full, like a Thanksgiving dinner, and you go down and you sit and watch the football game or something, and you fall asleep or something along those lines. But anyways, he's very happy, he's very, he's eaten and he's drunk, and his heart was cheerful. And he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And she came softly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. So you can just imagine the scene. It's getting dark. They've been having all this excitement going on, and all this is happening there. And Ruth's there in the corner in the shadows and looking, and just keeping an eye out, staying in the shadows. And then she sort of tiptoes over there, and covers his feet, and lays down there. And as time goes by, obviously it's going to get colder. So we have here in verse 8, it says, now it happened at midnight that the man was startled, and he turned himself, and there was a woman lying at his feet. So he's like, she wasn't there when I fell asleep down there. So right there at that moment, probably his feet are getting cold because he's been laying there on the floor, and he had his robe over top of his feet. And so at midnight, when it got even colder out, he gets startled, and he sees that there's a woman there at the foot of where he was laying. And he said to her, "Who are you?" So at this particular moment, he'd been seeing Ruth in the field for a long time, but at this particular moment, it's dark. He doesn't know who's there, and he's like, there's somebody sleeping down here at the bottom where my feet were. So he says, "Who are you?" And so she said, "I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative." The phrase there in Hebrew literally means spread the corner of your garment over your maidservant. So the covering of your wings, put your garment over there. So in a lot of ways, this is a marriage proposal from Ruth to Boaz in a lot of ways. Take me under your wing. Protect me. It's, you are the Kinsman Redeemer of our family. So she says, I am Ruth. I am your maidservant. Take me under your protection. Take me under your care. And then we have Boaz's response. So he could have been, he breaks the tension because you don't really know exactly what's going to happen at this moment as this particular story unfolds. I mean, will he be bitter? Will he be upset? Will he be, what's going to happen? So he said, "Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, in that you do not go after the young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do to you all that you request. For all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman." So Boaz's response is this very open one. He blesses her. He gives her this blessing. He says, "Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter." And then he goes on to say, you could have gone after any man in this town. It could have been a young man, it could have been a poor person, it could have been a rich person, but you chose to go and follow the Kinsman Redeemer, to go after a close relative of Elimelech. And so, it could have been for love, it could have been, somebody that's poor, it could have been one of Boaz's people, it could have been somebody rich, but she was caring more about helping Naomi than about her own happiness or her own agenda. She cared more about helping save property and to save the lineage of Naomi and Elimelech. And so he says, "Do not fear, I will do for you what you request. All the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman." So once again, her reputation. We talked about this last week. So the people knew that she had a virtuous spirit, that she had a spirit of following Naomi back to Bethlehem, where she could have gone back to her homeland. And so Boaz sees that she is a woman of integrity. But then we have a little kink in the armor, let's put it that way. It's not a happily ever after yet, and there's no Disney logo yet. And so there's a little something that happens here. In verse 12, it goes on and says, "Now it is true that I am a close relative. However," there's like the but there, there's the caveat. "However, there is a relative closer than I." So Boaz brings up this issue that, yes, I am a kinsman redeemer of Elimelech, but there is another guy who's actually a little bit closer, and so he's technically the closer kinsman redeemer. And so he's the one that should take precedence. So he's giving this particular person an opportunity. So he says, there is a relative closer than I. So he says, "Stay the night." So verse 13, continuing on in chapter 3, he says, "Stay this night, and in the morning it shall be that if he will perform the duty of a close relative, of a kinsman redeemer for you, good. Let him do it. But if he does not want to perform the duty for you, then I will perform the duty for you. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning." So Boaz puts out his game plan. And he says, all right, this is what's going to happen. Stay here the night, and in the morning, I'm going to go to town. I'm going to find him, and I'm going to give him the whole package here. You can redeem the land that Elimelech had lost when he went to Moab, and redeem you, Ruth, as for the line. He says, so if I go to town and he's willing to do that, then that's great. That we'll take care of it that way. But if he chooses not to do it, then I will be willing to do it. And he makes this oath. He says, I will perform the duty for you as the Lord lives. So he makes this oath saying that this is what's going to happen. I'm going to make sure that this is all followed through. So he says, I made that oath, and we will make sure that it goes through. So she lay at his feet until morning, and she arose before one could recognize another. So they're getting up before there's too much light in the sky, so people don't wonder what might have happened or transpired that night between the two of them, even though nothing really happened, but, different people might come out in the night. And so this might also throw a wrench in the whole deal if people actually saw her leaving there. So when it's still sort of dark, and when one couldn't recognize another, so that kind of haziness, like, who are you over there? I don't know. I can't tell exactly who's there. So that very early morning, maybe even a fog in the air. But so before anyone could actually recognize one another. And then he said, do not let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. So, they're making sure that they part ways so that they don't really see this, other people can see it. And he said, bring the shawl that is on you and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6, some translations will say ephods, but it's 6 portions of grain, 6 portions of barley, and laid it on her. Then she went into the city. So these 6 portions, an ephod would have been, if it was actually an ephod, which we had saw in the earlier chapter, talking about an ephod of barley that she brought back. If it was 6 ephods, it would be between 175 to 285 pounds of grain, which I don't think Ruth is probably going to drag back into the city, that much grain. So most commentators, because the word ephod is not in the original Hebrew, think it's probably this other measurement called a seah, which would have probably been about 58 pounds of grain, which is still a huge amount, but not necessarily unbearable, let's put it that way, going back uphill to where Naomi lives. So it was a good measure of grain that was used. And then she went into the city. When she came to her mother-in-law's, she said, is that you, my daughter? Then she told her all the things that the man had done for her. And she said, these 6 portions of barley he gave me. For he said to me, do not go empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Then she said, sit still, my daughter, until you know what matter will turn out. For the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day. So she goes back to Naomi. It's probably still pretty early. Probably the sun really hasn't peeked over the horizons there of the Judean hills. And, is that you, Ruth? What happened? What happened during the night? And so she explains everything. The narrator doesn't go back in and retell the whole story again because we just read it. But, she explains the story and says, Boaz gave me this grain to bring back to you. And so she explains what he's going to be doing. And then verse 18 concludes this particular chapter by saying, all right, so sit still, pay attention, you don't necessarily need to go out into the city until everything has been concluded. So Boaz is going to be doing some legal work, let's put it that way, throughout the day. So Naomi's saying, sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out. Because at this point in time, is it going to be Boaz? Is it going to be the other relative? Who's it going to be? It's what's going to happen? Who's going to redeem this land? Somehow, at this particular point, before the end of the day, there's going to be a verdict in this particular trial. There's going to be an outcome. And Naomi probably knew Boaz before they went to Moab, and she knows that he's a man that once he's set on a mission, he's going to go after it. He's going to finish it. So she says, the man will not rest until he has concluded this matter this day. So there's going to be an outcome. One way or another, it's either Boaz or it's the other relative. It's going to happen. So as we look, next week we'll conclude this particular book. Here we have this beautiful picture of redemption and family. And we'll see is next week as we go into it. But the Kinsman Redeemer is very much a picture of Christ and how he came to redeem us. Here we've been following this journey of these 3 people. We've been seeing Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. And it's this picture of redemption. As we read this story, we, if we've read it before, this is, if you've grown up and you've read the Bible and everything, you know how this particular story is going to end. And, but it's important to know that for these particular people, they didn't know the outcome when this was happening. Naomi didn't know what was going to happen. Ruth didn't know what was going to happen. Boaz didn't know what was happening. They were there in that moment. Just because, we know what the end of the book says doesn't mean that we know what's going to happen in the in-between time. What's happening as God is working. This is a real journey for them. It's a new beginning. It's a new beginning for Naomi, a new beginning for Ruth, and in a lot of ways, a new beginning for Boaz as well. As we go through life, we might be in the midst of a trial. We might be in the midst of some kind of struggle, a temptation, whatever it might be. We don't know what the outcome is going to be in the end for our own journey that we're on. For us that have read the end of the book of Ruth, it's looking 50 years down in the future. Well, I don't know what 50 years in the future is going to look like. I might not even know what 50 minutes in the future looks like. The writer of Hebrews would write in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8, it says, Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. We're just like Ruth and Naomi and Boaz. We're in the midst of that particular story, whatever the story is that God has in our life. We never know exactly what the future is going to hold for each and every one of us, but we know who holds the future. And as we go through the midst of the trials, and as God is writing our own story, our new beginnings, our new journeys, He's still in charge, and He's still leading and directing us wherever we might go. Just as He was leading and directing Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. They truly didn't know where things were going to end up in the end. The biblical writer who wrote the book of Ruth was looking back on this story. They knew where the story ended. We don't know where the story is going to end in our own lives. But just trust the journey and trust the one who is our Kinsman Redeemer, the one who went to the cross of Calvary to die for us. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for the story of Naomi and Ruth and Boaz and the way that you orchestrated their lives. It wasn't just by chance. And even if the reason that Elimelech and his family left was a selfish reason or a sinful reason, there's so many times that you use us in spite of ourselves for your glory. I thank you for the way that you orchestrated the paths of Ruth, and the paths of Naomi, and the paths of Boaz, to paint a masterpiece that's still being painted today. Our own journeys are uncertain, Lord. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know where our paths are going to take us. I thank you that your word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our paths. I thank you that sometimes you only give us the next footstep, reaching the next moment on the journey of our lives. Help us as we go through that journey to keep our eyes focused on Jesus Christ, the author and finisher of our faith, who went to the cross to die for our sins. I thank you for the redemption that we have through his blood. Bless each one that's here today. And I pray as they continue to study your word that it would just continue to work in their hearts and in their lives as they go on their journeys. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.